Hello and welcome. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Indian culture and how you can use the things that you learn about Indian culture in your classroom to work with your ESL students. We all know that it's important to be able to know a little bit about a student's culture so that we can relate to them and we can understand where they're coming from. So some things that we're going to talk about today are geographic location, history of India, just some general facts and statistics about India, their cultural diversity, things that include their festivals, holidays, and traditions, and some things that you can be aware of in the classroom, some strategies to help working with these children, and some different ways to use technology. It is impossible not to be astonished by India. Nowhere on earth does humanity present itself in such a dizzying, creative burst of cultures and religion, races and tongues. Every aspect of the country presents itself on a massive, exaggerated scale, worthy in comparison only to the superlative mountains that overshadow it, which we know are the Himalayas. Perhaps the only thing more difficult than to be indifferent to India would be to describe or understand India completely. It is such a huge country with such a massive population, and its history is so rich and goes back so far that it would take you years to really dig really deep into Indian history and to really understand it all. So today we're just going to scratch the surface. I found two really interesting quotes by Mark Twain that I thought just really summed up my views of India. The first one says, "So far as I am able to judge, nothing has been left undone, either by man or nature, to make India the most extraordinary country that the sun visits on his rounds. Nothing seems to have been forgotten, nothing overlooked." And the second one says, "India is the cradle of the human race, the birthplace of human speech, the mother of history, the grandmother of legend, and the great grandmother of tradition. Our most valuable and most restricted materials in the history of man are treasured up in India only." And I thought, who can say that better than Mark Twain? And he just really sums up just how overpowering India is and how far reaching its influence has been throughout history. Geographic location, we all know that India is located in Asia, but it's such a large country that it is considered a subcontinent, and we would also consider it somewhat of a peninsula. It does have two huge coastlines. On these coastlines, the western and the eastern Ghats is where the majority of the population lives in massive sprawling cities. Also, in the northwest region, there's tons of farming, and up on the Indus River Valley, there are large rural populations. India is a land of contrast, and I thought that this is something that we often forget. We have heard of the caste system in India, and we know that it no longer supposedly exists, but those traditions and beliefs are very deep rooted into the culture, and the poor seem to be getting poorer and the rich seem to be getting richer, and the gap just continues to grow between these two groups of people. India, because it is growing so quickly, does have a really large middle class that's growing, but the gap continues to grow between the rich and the poor. There are lots of cultural inventions that come from India. People out there who love math definitely probably know the influence that India has had on the math uh, area. They have invented the digit zero and the numbering system. They've invented chess, algebra, trigonometry, calculus, the decimal system. Kids all know the game Snakes and Ladders. That's a game that has come from India. The value of pi. Many Nobel prizes in literature, physics, economics, peace, and medicine have come from Indians. Ayurveda is the earliest literature of medicine known to mankind. The father of medicine, Charaka, practiced medicine 2,500 years ago, and these writings and things that he has left are the earliest known to mankind, just truly interesting. There are 2 million Indians in the U.S. That's 1.5% of our population. 38% of the doctors in the United States are Indian. 12% of the scientists are Indian. 30%, 36%, sorry, of NASA scientists. 34% of Microsoft employees. 28% of IBM employees. 17% of Intel and 13% of Xerox employees are all Indian. So I think this is a really clear statistic that shows that when these group of people immigrate to the United States, they do make a really big difference in our society and they play some really important roles. The history of India, like mentioned before, is just too large to even grasp. So we can divide those periods of history down into 7 main time periods. The two that I think are the most interesting is the first, the Indus Valley Civilization. This is the cradle of civilization. Some of the first civilizations known to man are in this area. And then the sixth one, the European rule from 1800 to 1947. Portuguese, Dutch, French, and the English ruled over India. 1947 was really not that long ago, and so that's sort of mind blowing to think that they've only been an independent country for that long. And I think that's a really interesting thing to bring up with your students, especially if you're in a social studies classroom. This is World War II. Ask the students, what have you studied about the World War II? They'll probably have a really different perspective on it than we do and how we teach our students here. And so that would be a really interesting and valuable thing that they can add to the classroom. It's going to take advantage of those sort of things whenever you can see them so that they can feel valuable in their opinion and they can enrich your classroom. Hindi is the national language. There are 21 other languages that are either spoken or have classical status. The number of dialects in India is high. They have around 1,600 different dialects in India. Over 800 million Indians, or about 80% of the country's population, are Hindi. Other religious groups include Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, Jains, lots of different representations of religion in the country, but definitely Hinduism and Islam are probably the two greatest majorities. India is rich in cultural diversity because they have had so many other countries bring their influence over such a long period of time. So you can see British influence in the architecture, you can see Chinese influence, Portuguese, French, and they've sort of definitely took a little bit from all of those things to create their own. One of the things that I enjoy most about Indian culture is Bollywood movies and music and their dancing. It's very lively, very authentic and genuine, and very unique to India. Festivals are really important. They can either be religious, usually they do revolve around Hindu holidays. Lori, the Holi. Holi is the one I think is the most interesting. They kind of are celebrating the coming of spring and they have this colored powder and they run through the streets and everybody's covering each other in colored powder. That would be really interesting to take part in. I'm not going to go into all of these, but you can write them down and read about them a little bit more. It's really good to be aware of these different holidays that take place and that are important to your students because they might be absent from school. So to kind of have an understanding of when these things are taking place and what's going on in their family home is important. India in the past witnessed successive waves of immigration from various foreign places like Persians, Arabs, British, and Turks. Though through time all of them retreated, they left behind their indelible mark, which is still reflected in the culture and traditions of India. From one state to another, there is a huge variation in language, attire, beliefs, and other demographic aspects of the Dinsians that is simply mind-boggling. However, there are some important prominent features that bind all Indians together. These traditions range from the arati done to welcome the guest to touching the feet of the elders. The cultural traditions of India have been passed from generation to generation and are deeply rooted in the Indian way of living. Etiquette in India is very deep rooted in tradition as well, although as time goes by, things do continue to change and become a little bit looser. Um, as far as the dress, women usually do wear saris, and when men have traditional robe like shirts that they wear that are usually long with pants. They will dress for the occasion. If they need to wear something traditional, they will, but sometimes they still will dress in Western clothing. It just depends on the situation. It's always important that you take your shoes off before entering a temple or someone's home. When you are greeted by an Indian, they're not really used to physical contact by people they don't know. Men and women, especially, it's kind of taboo for them to touch in public. So, the safest thing to do is just to greet them with a namaste with your hands together in a prayer position in front of your heart. Many Indians live in a joint family system. They live with their parents and their grandparents, and this is a traditional way of living, and they help each other. It makes for lighter work, especially in rural areas. The women are still the homemakers, and they teach their daughters to be homemakers as well. Worshipping is an important part of daily life for Indian people. They find the holy basil tulsi planted in maximum houses, which people water as well as worship every day religiously. Many Indians are associated to various religious sects and attend weekly gatherings and listen to sermons. It's really important for you to respect your elders in the Indian community and culture. It's not uncommon for youngsters to touch the feet of an elder as a way of greeting them, and especially this is something that they'll do on important occasions. Playing the perfect host is an integral part of Indian culture and tradition. As such, Indian people go to great lengths to make their guests feel welcome. Garlanding or arati, applying tilak on a red vermilion mark on the forehead of the guest, thus is an important part of the reception ritual. There are basically two reasons behind the garlanding tradition of India. It showcases one's happiness at receiving the particular guest, and secondly, it is a form of publicly acknowledging the guest's importance. Family values are extremely important. Living peacefully and respecting each other's rights, never compromising on integrity, maintaining strong bonds with family members, being hospitable, remembering and bowing to God before first thing in the morning, indulging in yoga and meditation, and always taking the advice of elders in the case of any important decision. Things that all teachers should be aware of if you have Indian students in your classroom is the diet that they eat. Most of them do remain vegetarians due to their religion, so that's important. They do generally eat with their hands in their country, so this is something that's not considered dirty or rude to them. They are not expected to question the teacher because teachers are highly upheld individuals in India, so this might make the parents a little bit uncomfortable coming to you if they feel like their child's needs aren't being met. They may have a difficulty accepting women in positions of authority, and like we said before, to be aware of holidays, festivals, and how to greet each other. Some strategies to use. Co-teaching is always a great strategy to use if you have someone who speaks in the mother tongue. Don't water down the material. Focus on literacy, that's going to help them across the board. Use reading strategies that are consistent. Cooperative group work, provide resources for translation, and take into consideration the student's background knowledge and perspective. Use technology. This engages kids. There are many great things to use. You can use Screencast-O-Matic for directions. Let them create multimedia projects to be able to show you that they understand the content. Let them play games. And lastly, let them watch videos of the content. They can watch them over and over again, and this will help them being able to have visuals as well as kind of giving them the confidence to go back and read it till they understand it. And this is going to do it for my presentation. Thank you so much for your time. I hope that you've learned something. Namaste.